Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of Africa Governance Voices. This is a podcast spearheaded by the African Peer Review Mechanism Continental Secretariat, where we are discussing all things governance. Today, we are joined by Advocate Vasu Gounden, the Executive Director of ACORD, an institution that spearheads peace building, peace and security on the African continent. Advocate, welcome.
Thank you, Lennon. And thank you for the coffee.
Oh, you're most welcome, Advocate. I hope it's a good coffee.
I hope it's on your account, not mine. Just to be transparent. That's what governance is all about, right?
That's very true. Advocate, let's dive in straight to the discussions we've been having over the past few days. We're here having a retreat between the African Peace and Security Council and the African Peer Review Mechanism. Why do you think this is necessary?
Well, look, this retreat is the fourth retreat. And when it was originally conceived, it was to ensure that there is coordination and collaboration between the arms of the African Union that are involved in governance as well as peace and security. And I think it's absolutely crucial that this annual retreat takes place, because when you are dealing with a situation of conflict, you are not dealing with a situation that is unidimensional. It's multidimensional. And it means that people cannot work in silos. If you are dealing with governance, if you are dealing with development, if you are dealing with peace and security, you need to collaborate at some point. So this is the importance of this retreat.
We've seen so many flashpoints of conflict on the continent. Which ones do you think are most critical for African leaders, particularly heads of states and the Peace and Security Council, to focus on right now?
Well, look, I mean, we've got some conflicts that are really serious conflicts at this point, that are armed conflicts that are affecting citizens of their states. They're displacing people. People are becoming refugees, and a number of people are dying also. Sudan is a case in point. In the Sahel region, we've had many conflicts. So we are looking at, from the Atlantic Ocean to the Red Sea, that entire belt is a troubled region. It's a cocktail of insurgencies, armed and radicalized groups, organized criminal syndicates, drug traffickers, arms traffickers, human traffickers. If we move, on the continent, we look at the Horn of Africa, we see there still ongoing conflicts in Ethiopia. Somalia is not out of the woods. We go to Central Africa, we see the Central African Republic, there is still conflicts there. Go to North Africa. So I think there are many conflicts at different stages. The important thing is, and what I presented yesterday, is there are deep systemic challenges in Africa. And what we are seeing in the manifestation of conflict in Sudan, the Sahel and Central African Republic, is something that could come to many countries, even stable countries, because of the deep systemic challenges that we're facing.
Thank you so much. Now let's focus on what you've presented yesterday. And I thought it was a very powerful presentation where, to some extent, it's an early warning to African governments. Sure. Can you just give our viewers a snippet of what you think we should focus on, especially when it comes to the youth this youth bulge that is on the African continent, as well as the big cities that are growing? How can African governments start responding to this and actually start planning early, so that we don't have conflict that is actually picked up because of the youth bulge, as well as these big populations that are coming up on the continent?
So Lennon, it's what I said earlier, the systemic problems that are deeply structural on the continent that affect every single country on the continent, including the country we are sitting in now. South Africa has the same challenges. So what I pointed out was very simply that we have exponential population growth, rapid urbanization, and our development is not keeping up with that. So literally, you have your populations increasing and urbanization, and your development is flat. The gap is what we call the conflict gap. So to put that in perspective, if you look at population growth on our continent, we're the only continent globally that currently is growing in population.
That's true.
Okay, so if you take 1990 as a kind of turning point, the population of Africa was 600 million. To put that in perspective, it took us 1,990 years, almost 2,000 years in history to get to 600 million. But in the last 40 years, it's a very, very short period, we added 800 million more people, taking us to 1.4 billion. In an even shorter period, the next 25 years to 2040, we will increase our population by another billion people, 2050. Okay? That means that we will have 2.4 billion people in Africa. Almost 60% of that will be young people. Okay? The youth. In addition to the population increasing, people are urbanizing. So they are coming to cities, right? Today we are about 40% urbanized across the board. By 2050, we will be 70%. Now just think about if our development doesn't keep up. And what will allow our development to keep up is the beneficiation of our resources, our mineral resources. We cannot be exporting raw materials, our mineral resources, to other parts of the world where value is added there.
I totally agree with you. This conversation has been on the cards for a very long time on the African continent as far as beneficiation. Do you think we are moving towards beneficiation of our natural resources, or as most people say, talk shop? Is it talk shop? You need to be honest, particularly to young people that are watching. Are there any practical steps that are being taken right now to actually beneficiate, to add value to the natural resources? Or are there any examples that you can give us?
Okay, so let's take the coffee.
Yes.
I'm hoping that this coffee comes either from Burundi, Kenya, or Ethiopia. Okay? What does it mean if the coffee comes from Burundi, Kenya, or Ethiopia? It means there are farmers who are now gainfully employed.
That's true.
They are growing coffee. They are processing that coffee. They are packaging that coffee. And they are exporting it. That's value addition. That employs a number of people.
Yes.
It's creating jobs. It's young people who now have jobs. But let's even move beyond that. If we take lithium, if we take uranium, we take all those critical minerals, and we don't export them, but we add value on the continent by building factories where those materials are processed. Now we're talking about engineers, right?
That's true.
We're talking about coltan that needs to go into your mobile phone.
Yes.
But we are sending the raw coltan. It's going into mobile phones in China, in the US, and everywhere in the world. What if we were in the DRC building a factory? And now we have young engineers, African engineers, who are part of the value chain of building cell phones. Okay, not assembling. We want to have them innovated and built. Electric cars. Think about electric cars. We need to make sure those electric cars are built in Africa. That's the value addition we're looking for.
No. I hope African governments and particularly policymakers are listening to some of this advice that you're consistently giving them in most of these platforms, including this retreat. Now, let's talk more about Accord, the institution that...
Before we come to Accord,
yes.
If we talk about the challenge, let's talk about the consequences. Because if leaders are listening to this, young people like yourself are listening, we need to understand the consequences. So what are the consequences if we don't beneficiate? Okay, if we don't beneficiate our agricultural resources, our natural resources, it means by 2050, 70% of people will be urbanized, 60% of those will be young people. So we're talking about 1 billion young people without jobs, with no education, healthcare, sanitation, water, etc. That is not a demographic dividend for the continent. That is now a demographic disaster for the continent. And I've been saying to our European friends also, and I'm sure they will be listening also, that young Africans facing a dystopian future, no future basically, they are going to migrate somewhere. Okay, they're not going to stay and beholden to armed groups and organized criminal syndicates, etc.,
They'll find
they are
greener
going to move.
pastures.
They're not going to be moving to Russia and China because they have nothing in common with Russians and the Chinese. They don't speak the language, they don't understand the culture. They are going to go to countries that previously colonized Africa, okay, because they speak the language. They speak English, they speak French, they imbibe the culture, the food culture. So I'm saying to our European friends, for mutual benefit, for your security and our security, let's go into a partnership. Bring your technology, bring your resources. Let's beneficiate in Africa. That way, we all win in the future. The consequences: urban warfare, rise in social and political conflict, rise in insurgencies, rise in criminal syndicates, and that is a disaster. This is the early warning we're talking about.
Advocate, we already saw this in Nairobi, Kenya,
Yes.
last year with youth protests. Do you think this wave of young people being discontent and not happy with their government is going to spread to other African countries that have youth populations?
Without a doubt. There is no question about it. I have said on many platforms, if we don't get the development right in the next decade or 2 decades, most African countries will slip into a dystopian future. This is my prediction. I hope it won't come true. Okay? And young people, this is your future. You look at yourself, Lennon, all of your colleagues who are doing this program. This is your future.
That's very true.
You are going to be the leaders in the next decade. What are you going to lead?
There won't be anything to
Well,
lead.
there won't be anything to lead.
If you're speaking to an ordinary young man in Lumumbashi or in Jamena, Chad, that wants to contribute positively to peace building, what are the practical steps they can take to actually get involved and play a positive role? Because the conversation has always been negative, looking at young people as the cause of conflict, those that are recruited into violent extremism. But there's been also an approach to look at young people as peace builders. And that goes to the work that you've been doing at Accord.
Yes.
Yeah. Can you give us a snippet of some of the programs you do and how young people can actually engage in the work that you do at Accord?
Okay, so 2 things.
Yes.
What we do at Accord with young people, we are working with the youth ambassadors of the African Union, of the REX, and we have been training literally hundreds of young people. We've just graduated this week a class of 12 young people who didn't just get trained in conflict management. They are trained as trainers in conflict management. So they will go out and train others.
Okay.
Similarly, we have trained many cohorts of young people who have now become trainers on the continent. So we are building infrastructures of peace on the ground where young people in their communities are either facilitators, mediators or negotiators or trainers in conflict management. That's part of the peace building project. So that's one part of it. The other part is you sit here, Lennon, and you are doing this interview because you're a graduate, right? You have a skill. You have gone and you've got a degree and you now can trade your skills.
That's true.
That's the other thing, education. Now, we may be short of schools and university, but remember, we're in the era of artificial intelligence. Okay, so schools, bricks and mortar schools, even teachers, may be a thing of the past.
That's true.
How do we embrace artificial intelligence, new technologies? How do we bring the businesses, Google and Microsoft and everybody else, and say, yes, you can come with your businesses, but also bring your technology to educate. Young people can sit at home. They can sit in a community library. They can now be educated. We don't need to build millions of schools. We need to equip millions of young people with the technology. You guys are into the technology. I mean, I look at all the stuff you put on me. You guys are into the technology.
Yeah, that's
this
correct.
this
That's
podcast
correct.
is part of the education.
Yes.
So let's get practical.
Yes.
You know, and young people, by the way, they don't only need skills. They all don't need PhDs. We need carpenters. We need plumbers. We need
Work with our
builders.
hands,
We need
that's correct.
engineers. We need people to work with their hands. We need skilled people. This is what we need to do on the continent.
Advocate, in closing, it's the 22nd anniversary of the APRM. I know you have greatly contributed to the infrastructure of the APRM. what can you say to our listeners as far as the APRM's contribution to peace and security is concerned, but in particular to the early warning element that we've been discussing over the past few days at the retreat between the PSC and the APRM? How can the APRM take its work even further so that it can benefit African people at large?
Okay, so remember that the first thing is we must be very proud as Africans of the African peer review mechanism because it is without precedent globally. No other continent in the world has a mechanism where its peers review each other.
That's true.
And for governments, for governments to come and say, I am willing to be reviewed because it's a voluntary process, right? 44 countries in Africa have volunteered to do this. So the first thing is we must be proud as Africans we have a mechanism. The second thing is it's not just a mechanism for governance, it's an early warning mechanism because the indicators that we have deal with the internal intrinsic issues and they deal with the external extrinsic issues. So the intrinsic ones, corruption, bad governance, poor public services, all of these things are the intrinsic things that we need to deal with. Ethnic diversification that we haven't managed on the ground. Then there are the external, the extrinsic factors like climate change, like terrorism that comes from outside, etc. And the indicators that the APRM has and the reviews that it does serves as early warning. Now, where do we go from there? That's the important thing. Because there's enough early warning. What I told you just now about the deep socioeconomic, that's early warning, right? We need early action. And there we have the panel of the elders, AU, the REX, all of that. You remember you're dealing with leaders. And they want to talk to their peers. They don't want to talk to you and I. Okay, so the panel of elders, eminent people, they can go quietly to governments and say, we have this report. This is what is happening. And we think these are some of the things you could do. So we need to go from early warning to early action.
Vasu, I really want to thank you for coming in very short notice to sit and have a conversation with us. We're very proud of the work that you do at Accord, and in particular the youth development project that you have. It's really extensive, and we thank you so much for your contributions.